I am so pleased today. Welcome everyone. I have with me Miss Valarie Kaur, and it's going to be a difficult job for me to introduce Valarie to you. Let me give it a shot. First of all, Valarie is an activist. She is a change maker, a peacemaker. She is an author, a speaker, a TED Talk speaker. I'll highly recommend her TED Talk. Just search Valarie Kaur, and on TED channel you'll find her a brilliant talk on love, revolutionary love. And she's also a mother to two beautiful children. To me, as a member of fellow Sikh community, I can say that Valarie has made all of us very proud with her terrific work, not just in her speaking and her engagements, but in her production of some terrific documentaries and bringing to awareness of people's minds some of the changes that our society needs to see. Welcome, Valarie. How are you today?
Thank you, brother. Vaheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji
Waheguru Ji ki Fateh.
ki Fateh. It's so beautiful for me to be here with you and to have this conversation. Thank you.
Well, let's get started because your time is limited. I want to ask you the first question I want to ask you today is we have all heard a lot about your work, and I'm deeply interested in more people knowing about your work, Valarie. What motivated you to become a change maker?
I grew up with my grandfather, my Nanaji, who I called Papaji. Papaji's room was next to mine. And anytime I came home from school and I needed to go to my sanctuary, I would leap into my grandfather's arms and nuzzle into Papaji's long, long dari. And he would tell me stories. He would tell me stories of Guru Nanak and Bibi Nanki. He would tell me stories of Guru Gobind Singh. He would tell me stories of his own life, how he served in World War II and was so proud to have never fired a bullet. How his Muslim soldier friend was riddled with bullets next to him, and he took off his turban, and wrapped his body with the fabric to return him, and then eventually tell his friend's parents that he perished. How he would he survived the partition of India, was on trains, watching the trains go back and forth, sending dead bodies to Pakistan, sending dead bodies to India, how he barely escaped that incredible violence. How he was on rooftops during the genocidal violence in Delhi in 1984, watching the street below, keeping the family safe, keeping himself safe. How he survived all of these things. He saw so much violence, he saw so much trauma, and yet that never diminished his pure delight in being alive. He was always in Vismad, in wonderment. He was always singing poetry. He was always writing his own poetry in Urdu, in Hindi, in Punjabi. He would have his friends over and they would sit for hours with Cha in the garden reading the poetry to each other, and I would sneak in and listen. My grandfather, Papaji, was a Sant Sipahi. In the truest sense, he was a sage warrior. Inner wisdom for outer courage. And I, as a little girl, with two long braids, my grandfather would say, "My dear, do not abandon your post." Here I'm a little girl growing up in the farmlands of California, riding on tractors, looking at the stars, talking to the cows. But my grandfather saw me as a warrior. And I thought I wanted to be like him when I grew up. I wanted to be a Sant Sipahi too. And I didn't know what that looked like or what that meant. I only know that it meant that I had to answer the call to courage whenever it came, that I had to learn how to make courage a practice like he did. And so, brother, I think that was my beginning. That was my journey in my Papaji's arms.
Beautiful answer. Thank you for that, Valarie. I'm touched by the idea of courage, leadership, and you being a young woman. I would like other young women to hear what leadership is to you and how you became a leader. So I want to hear a little more about your family background, if that's okay. A little bit more about, tell me more about your family. And before you do that, I want to share a little snippet about my upbringing, that I was also influenced deeply by my grandfather, who has been a source of inspiration for me, who was a freedom fighter in India. And served prison sentence because he was a freedom fighter, belonged to non-violent movement. In fact, he gave up his life due to the torture is received in the prison. So I've been deeply impacted by who my grandfather was, and then who my father was, my father became a law professor and an educator for 40 plus years and has really led a great life. So your story truly inspires me and reminds me of my story in some ways, though much humbler level than where you are, but equally, in many ways, equally blessed and blissful in the place I am, having touched people's lives around the world in simple ways. So tell us a little bit more about your family, and before we go into, if you make all the business of things, so tell us background of. You said you have two children.
I do. Their names are Kavi and Ananda,
Mm-hmm.
my little sage poet and my little vessel of joy. Kavi is 9 and Ananda is 5. And they've heard me talk a lot about Papaji. And, I think about your father and your grandfather. I think about all of our ancestors of that generation. And I remember standing in Kiritpur with Papaji, the river where we put the ashes of our loved ones, and Papaji said, "Oh, this is where I'm going to merge with my master. This is where I will go." And I was 11 years old, brother, and I started crying. I started crying so much. I was sobbing into his sweater, and he said, "Oh, Betty," like, "Oh, my dear," and he tapped my shoulder to try to comfort me, and then he said, "Oh, you have to sing Gurbani, you have to do kirtan, you have to understand that death is just a return to the oneness that always is." And I never really understood it. I never really understood it until years and years later. Papaji, the way that he died, he looked at each of his loved ones around the bedside. Each of them dabbed Amrit on his lips, and then he waited until Mammiji, my grandmother, dabbed the Amrit on his lips, and he took the cloth into his mouth, and he sighed, and he died. It was a masterful death. It was a sage death. And I felt so angry when he left me. I said, "Oh, he's left me without teaching the secret to his fearlessness." Until I began to realize that the way he died was his final lesson to me. Can you be that fearless in the face of life? Can you be that fearless in the face of death? And so I realized I had to practice. And so every night, and now I do this with my children, I say, okay, think of today as an entire lifetime with a beginning, a middle, an end. What was the hardest part of this lifetime? What was the most joyful part of this lifetime? What are you most grateful for in this lifetime? And then here's the tricky part. Are you ready to let go of this lifetime? Are you ready to behold everything you've known or loved and kiss it and let it go? Are you ready to die a kind of death? And so every day since my grandfather left me, I have been doing this practice, and I'm realizing, Sohela, what we sing to our children at night is this practice. Think of death as a wedding day, a reunion, a return, and I die a kind of death. And then so far every morning I wake up and my children and I say together, I get to be alive. I get to be alive today. I get to be alive today with you. And we listen to Japji Sav and we get ready for our day. And it is a way that I have finally learned how to live into my grandfather's courage, to realize that every day is its own lifetime, its own experiment with love, to embrace every morning as a new opportunity to show up with our best selves, to live into the love that our ancestors called us into. And brother, this is what I wanted to tell you as you think about your father and your grandfather, is that love outlasts life. Love outlasts life. I can feel my Papaji's love inside of me when I do that practice. I can feel him with me when I wake up in the morning. I can feel him. I can feel his love every time I hesitate to raise my hand or step on that stage or put new art in the world or try to speak truth to power. And I say, oh, if Papaji loves me, then I can step forth and do this thing. And tati vauna lagi, the hot winds cannot touch me. The hot winds cannot touch me. I feel like Papaji taught me how to become. Papaji taught me what a good ancestor looked like. And if I can live my life, if we can live our lives as good ancestors for our children and their children, then it will be enough.
I missed you just a little. You said he taught you what a good ancestor.
Yes, he taught me what a good ancestor looked like, what it meant to be a good ancestor. And
Excellent.
I said, if we too can live our lives in such a way that we can become good ancestors for our
Beautiful.
children and their children.
You know, you already mentioned, sister, you mentioned Japji Sahib, the morning prayer for Sikhs. And when I do the prayer with my wife almost every morning, if not every morning, because there are some mornings we travel differently, so I do it alone. And one of the things I'm taking away from the prayers, and you and I may connect there, is the idea of contentment by letting go of ego, by being humble, by accepting that things are not in our control, by accepting that, and Sikhs are supposed to be seekers. We are supposed to be humble throughout our life. The question I have for you with that background is, I have seen that Sikhism has clearly influenced who you are. I've heard your beautiful TED Talk. By the way, what a marvelous job you did there. It came from your heart, your spirit, your mind, and all of us who were listening to it, my colleague Christina and myself, we could tell, and my other colleague Shafan as well. So my question is, how does faith influence who Valarie Kaur is?
I think it is a Western conception that faith is something to be believed, like a set of beliefs that you have, a set of ideas that you have in your mind. Say these words, do these practices, and you live this faith well. I think that when I think of not Sikhism, but Sikhi is a way of being, a way of moving through the world. I can't separate my faith from what I do or what I say or how I feel, because it is more like an orientation of a way of moving through the world. Can I move through the world with the eyes of wonder, with the eyes of a sage? Can I move through the world with the heart of a warrior, with the call to courage? Can I move through the world the way that my grandfather did as a Sant Sipahi? That invitation to move through the world, walking the path of love, is the only way I know now how to be. And it ends up being the most joyful way of being alive. Chardvikala in the Sikh tradition, ever rising spirits, even in darkness, ever rising joy, even in darkness. I mean, in this moment, when we are facing such cataclysm from Gaza to Ukraine, from Congo to Sudan, as we are facing climate disasters and the rise of anti-authoritarian forces and this election season that brings so much hostility, as we're facing record numbers of hate crimes here in the United States, as we are facing all that might cause us to feel despair, what does it mean to say the future is dark and yet I still refuse to succumb to cynicism? What does it mean to say, yes, the future is dark, but I choose to show up with Jadvikala, with ever-rising joy? That way of being is what gave rise to this question I've been asking every single day. Yes, the future is dark, but what if? What if this is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if the world that is longing to be born is just on the other side of this era of transition, and we must listen to the wisdom of the midwife? Breathe, she says, and push, breathe and push. Every day, that all we can be responsible for is our part in the labor. And I find that the only way that I can play my part in the labor with integrity, the way that my grandfather did, the way that our ancestors did, is if I show up with love. And if I show up with love, then I'm showing up with joy. I'm showing up in Jardikula.
What wise words. We definitely need a reminder about love, to move away from division. With my background in conflict resolution, the three principles that come as a mediator to my mind, as a global mediator, will be the principles of empathy. And to empathize, we have to understand, we have to be curious, we have to let other party come into our life, we have to give a spotlight to the other person, which is connected to listening. We only listen when the other party becomes prominent. We don't listen when we think we know everything. I was in Rwanda last year, among 10 other countries I went to, and I was attending the memorial for the genocide of Tutsis. And one of the quotes that stands very close to my heart, Valarie, when I went to the museum was, if you knew me and you knew yourself, you wouldn't have killed me. And I think your idea of love is truly deeply is about that, is knowing ourselves. I love how you said love transcends death. It transcends past, comes into present. And the third idea from dispute resolution that comes to my mind as you speak is the idea of connectedness. Because I say without trust, without connection, there is no dispute resolution. So I almost feel like I'm reading from your book now, See No Stranger, but let me ask you about this beautiful book you wrote, a memoir, if I may, and tell us about, looks like you are on to a couple of more writings this fall. So
Yeah.
talk to us about it. Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you first about See No Stranger, about my first book. I was writing that book for almost 20 years. I began writing it after Balbir Singh Sodhi, who I called Balbir Uncle, was killed in the aftermath of September 11th. The first person killed in a hate crime after 9/11 was Balbir Uncle, and his murder really catalyzed me in my life into activism, as it did for many in our generation. And so I began to write about the stories of our community, our Sangat. I began to write about the communities I was laboring with as a civil rights leader, from the shores of Guantanamo to America's supermax prisons to poor neighborhoods where immigrants were fighting for dignity, to my summer spent in the Senate. I was writing about all the ways that I saw communities rise up in the face of injustice, starting with the Sikh community, but expanding throughout. And as I began to write through the years, I began to see patterns, which I began to call practices of revolutionary love. I came to believe that revolutionary love is the call of our times. It is the way that we can transition this culture and this world into the one that we dream. And the principles that I found that I lay out in See No Stranger are ones that you have put into practice when you were traveling and doing the peacemaking work. That love begins in wonder. It begins in wondering about the other as we would ourselves, which gives rise to empathy. That wondering about others like that means to listen, as you say, to listen. Deep listening is an act of surrender. We risk being changed by what we hear. And that when we listen that deeply, then we don't just resist endlessly, we reimagine. We reimagine a future that leaves no one outside of our circle of care. Wondering, grieving, fighting, listening, reimagining, breathing, pushing, these are all practices of revolutionary love that I explored in my book. And the book then gave rise to a movement, a revolutionary love movement all across the country. We have hundreds of communities who are putting the revolutionary love compass into practice where they are, schools and houses of worship and workplaces, community centers. It's been so inspiring to see the movement unfold. And as I was beginning to travel and talk to people about what does it mean to build beloved community, how do they make the love ethic the foundation of who they are and what their culture is, I began to hear a kind of fear, because they began to say, well, the future is so dark, it feels apocalyptic. It feels like the world is ending. Things are getting worse. How do I find the inner courage to practice love when things are feeling so dark? And so I said, well, I was beginning to feel things pretty dark too. You know, the moment, brother, when I really felt it was when my son started kindergarten on Zoom during the pandemic, but he could not go outside to play because the air was on fire from the wildfires spreading across California. And there was a little part of me that was still relieved that at least my little brown boy, you know, he wears a juda, at least he was inside our house and safe from the racial violence that I had documented my whole life. So that's what apocalyptic times feel like, like a cascade of crises that are all kind of rise in your body. And I thought, well, people are needing to go deeper. I need to go deeper. I need to figure out, how do I find the courage to show up? How did Papaji find the courage to show up? And so that inspired me to write my second book. And this, I haven't announced it yet. So this will be one of the first audiences to hear about it. The last 2 years, I have been on this journey with my ancestors. I was thinking, how did the first Sikhs, how did they survive apocalyptic times? How did they find the ability to answer the call to courage? How did they become Sant Sipahi? And as I was going through our ancestor stories, I could no longer see Guru Nanak without Bibi Nanki. I couldn't see Guru Angad without Mata Kivi. I could not unsee the women ancestors in the stories. And so this next book is called Sage Warrior. And I have the cover here. Here it is. Sage Warrior.
That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
And
Congratulations.
I'm retelling our ancestor stories. It's an imaginative retelling of the first 250 years of Sikh history through the eyes of the women. And I'm pulling forth the wisdom that I think we all can need now. And as I was on this journey of writing this book, we went to Punjab, we went to Sultanpur Lodi, we went to Amritsar, we went to Anandpur, we went to all the places, and I was showing my children the places. And so I weave in the stories of how I was able to give these stories to my children on this journey. And so throughout the book, I invite you to sit. It says, "Ao cha pido," come and have tea, and we'll talk together about what these stories mean and what wisdom they can offer us right now. So this book is coming out September 10th, and it's available for pre-order right now at sagewarrior.us. It's going to be so meaningful for me to share this offering with my Sangit, with our community, and with anyone who is hungry for new sources of wisdom for how to pursue courageous action in this time. So yeah,
I'm so
that's the
happy.
next big book.
So happy. This is the first interview podcast in which you share, one of the first in which you share your book. And feel honored with you. And may your next book also reaches the same success and more success as your previous project, Valarie. We need more love. We need more understanding. We need more listening. We need more people who can remove boundaries and not create boundaries. Speaking of which, it reminds me of one of the, let's use the word, beautiful hymns we use in our Sikh prayer daily, which is, as for our audience, which is Nanak Nam Jardi Pukala, Tere Pane Sarbat Da Pala. Sarbat Da Pala, which is, so every prayer, folks, what we in Sikhism we talk about, may everyone be blessed. And we don't say, may Sikhs be blessed, may Punjabis be blessed, may Indians be blessed, may Americans be blessed. We say, everyone be blessed. So this idea of connectedness around the world, may everyone be blessed. How do we see each other without us and them? How can we go deeper into the psychology, the upbringing, the cultural background we all carry, the identity that we carry so strongly? And how do we remove that? And I recommend you all to look into Valarie's books to get one of the very good answers into that question, is how do we go beyond those that us and them. Speaking of which, elections are coming this year. I have to go there. My apologies. And we already see the tune-up of narrative of divide in our country, in my amazing country of America. And how do you guide us through this narrative? What do you think should be our thinking as we go through the next many months before the elections?
I think the first thing is to acknowledge just how grave this moment is for the history of the United States. So I'm not going to tell anyone how to vote. I only invite us to answer the call to courage, no matter what form that takes, that each of us has a role to play in this moment to protect our democracy, to protect communities who are at risk of state violence and hate violence, and to stand in our love and shared humanity. When you're standing in shared humanity, what does that look like? What do you say? What do you do? What does that call you to do? This September, we are launching a revolutionary love bus tour all across the United States. We're starting in Mesa, Arizona, where Bobironko was killed, at the gas station where he was killed, and we're reclaiming that place of pain as a place of hope and possibility. We're making a circle around the United States. We're going to big cities and small towns, and we're bringing our ancestor stories. We're bringing Sikh music, rag-based kirtan, and new renditions. And we're bringing dialogue and community building. We're bringing the opportunity for people to tell their own stories about when an act of love changed everything. And we'll be continuing through October, and then we'll be picking up again after the inauguration because we know that the country will need healing. So if you want to be part of this movement in real time, if you want to join us on the bus tour, you can also go to sagewarrior.us and just type in your email. We haven't announced this publicly yet either, but we're thinking, let's bring people the medicine that we need. Let's give ourselves the medicine we need. Let's give ourselves the medicine of love. And when we do it together, love makes us brave.
Beautiful. You know, Valarie, as I think about elections, and I teach dispute resolution, practice dispute resolution, and as you said, around the world, 70 plus countries have been. One thing I noticed as I was in Brazil just a month ago, speaking before the Supreme Court of Brazil, Supreme Labor Court of Brazil, who have given me so much love and kindness, is somebody asked me about elections in the US, and my answer was something the following. I said, you know, I have friends who are Republicans, I have friends who are Democrats, and I have friends who are independents. And when I work with them on mediation, arbitration, when I work with them to listen to them, when I teach them law, all I think about is how beautiful, how powerful, how unique each one of them is, how important their stories are, and how one we are. Yet we are divided. So don't listen to voices that divide us, but do listen to voices that unite us. And that goes to the history as we speak. Speaking of which, I have to ask you one last question about revolutionary love. What is this revolutionary love? Tell us about it.
Well, we've been talking about it all along. Change is not coming from the top down. We need just leaders, we need just institutions and policies, and the only way we will deliver the world that we all need is through a shift in culture and consciousness. A way of being, a way of seeing that leaves no one outside of our circle of care. What we need is a revolution of the heart, what I call revolutionary love. And brother, revolutionary love is just my way of calling people to Guru Nanak's vision. Nako beri nahi begana. I see no enemy. I see no stranger. What does it mean to invite all of us to build a culture, a nation that sees no stranger, that leaves no one behind? And the idea that all of us have a role to play to birth that future, our particular role, one is not more important than the other. And we can fortify each other when we are answering the call to courage in our own lives. So revolutionary love is the choice to enter into labor for others, for our opponents, even for ourselves, to transform the world around us.
Miss Valarie Kaur, I couldn't be more proud of everything you're doing and leading the dialogue in our nation about love and togetherness and oneness, not division. And also, being a young leader, if I may say, I will fail to be a good interviewer if I don't ask you one question about leadership.
Anji.
Especially for our younger siblings out there, younger people around there. What words would you have for someone who's listening to us, who's in their teenagers or 20s or whatever, or younger, further, and how would you tell them what leadership is?
Leadership is aligning your deepest wisdom with what you say and what you do. When I was young, and even now, I noticed a voice in my head that would say, oh, you're not good enough. You're not strong enough. You're not smart enough. You're not beautiful enough. You're not enough. You're not sick enough. You're not American enough. You're not enough. You're not enough. You're not enough. And I think that voice is, I think of it as what Guru Nanak called home, the I that names itself over and against others, the I that makes us fear each other. I think that voice is in all of us. Perhaps that voice is especially loud in those of us who are born into bodies that are denigrated in this culture. It's not safe to be a woman of color, a Sikh woman of color, and stand up and talk about love as a force for justice. The voice is right that it's not safe. Get small. You're not enough. Get small. The voice is just wrong about the solution. The solution is not silence. It is more solidarity. Who can I stand with? Can I stand with my brother? Stand for love and justice with my brother. Can I stand with my sisters? Can I stand with my kin? Can I stand together? And so I have learned to listen to another voice in me, the voice that I think Papaji helped cultivate in me, the wise woman in me who says, oh, my love, you are enough. Oh, behind me is the portrait of Mai Pago. Do you see her? Mai Pago, the woman, the warrior who led 40 soldiers. Yeah, she led 40 soldiers back into battle. And I always wanted to be the warrior in the story. But I am the deserter too. I'm the one who gives in to that little voice who says, I can't do it. I'm not enough. I can't. And it's okay to be afraid sometimes. It's okay to breathe, to rest for a night. And then you call upon the wise woman, the woman warrior in you, to take your hand in the morning and to lead you back into the battlefield. To say, oh, my love, all you need to do is play your particular role. That's how you become liberated in this lifetime, just by showing up, answering the call when it's your time to answer it. And as long as what you say and what you do is aligned with your deepest wisdom, then it is enough. It is enough. It is enough.
Valarie, that's beautiful. That's my last comment, and then I will end our program today. And again, one more thank you to you. But before my last thank you, let me say a couple of quick sharings. One is you mentioned something behind you. I have a handmade portrait of traveling, a community in traveling, a family in traveling from Kenya. Of my travels to Kenya, Ghana, Kampala, Nigeria have taught me something beautiful about African culture overall, which is traveling is a must to be able to become wise. And then it reminds me of my travels to Brazil. There's a Brazilian scholar, Maria Quintana. And Maria Quintana says something powerful. She says, Maria says that to travel is to change the clothing of your soul. Until today, I didn't realize. I used to think it's only international travel is what Quintana is taking us to. But listening to you makes me realize it's the internal travel as well that makes us change the clothes of our soul. Thank you for leading on to this internal travel, into this idea of revolutionary love. Thank you for your time, most importantly. You were very generous. And thank you, all of you, for listening.
Thank you, brother. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa.
Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.